The night my son changed the locks on the house while I was still packing my clothes into cardboard boxes, he looked me dead in the eyes and said I was too old to keep fixing everybody's problems. An hour later, my belongings were stacked beside a leaking dumpster behind his apartment building, while cold rain soaked through the only coat I had left. What my son didn't realize was that humiliating me that night was about to become the most expensive mistake of his entire life. Because 4 years later, I was standing inside a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Blackthorn Harbor while he sat across town in a foreclosure office begging strangers for more time. And the look on his face when he discovered the woman he abandoned now owned the luxury building he was about to get evicted from, honey. That moment was worth every sleepless night I spent crying beside a buzzing Motel ice machine. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about what happens when the woman everybody discards quietly becomes more powerful than the people who tried to destroy her. My name is Evelyn Carter. And this is how a 61-year-old widow went from eating vending machine dinners in a weekly motel to owning half the downtown riverfront without begging a single soul for mercy. Because, sweetheart, revenge isn't about yelling. It's about succeeding so hard the people who broke you can't even afford to stand beside you anymore. 2 days before my son threw me out, I was folding his daughter's laundry while listening to him argue with debt collectors in the garage. I remember standing there matching tiny pink socks together, thinking how strange life was. At 61 years old, after raising a child alone, surviving a cheating husband, and burying the only man who ever truly loved me, I had somehow become the unwanted guest in my own family's life. My husband, Walter, had died 11 months earlier. After 32 years together, a drunk driver ended our marriage in less than 6 seconds. 1 minute we were arguing over whether we needed more mulch for the backyard garden. The next minute I was identifying his wedding ring in a hospital emergency room. The insurance payout barely covered the medical bills and funeral costs. So when my son Daniel offered to let me stay with his family for a little while, I believed him. I thought that's what families did. They helped each other survive hard seasons. But somewhere between helping my granddaughter with homework and contributing half my Social Security check toward groceries, I became inconvenient. Daniel's wife, Vanessa, never said it directly at first. She preferred little comments designed to sting slowly. Older people really struggle with boundaries. Kids need stability, not too many authority figures. Some people get too comfortable living off family. Funny thing was, I cooked their meals, cleaned their kitchen, watched their children for free, and paid part of their electric bill while Daniel spent money they didn't have trying to impress strangers online. Every night he sat in that leather recliner scrolling luxury real estate videos and business podcasts while overdue notices piled up in the kitchen drawer. He wanted the appearance of success more than success itself. And Vanessa, she treated image like oxygen. The woman bought designer handbags while their mortgage payments bounced twice in the same month. I knew they were drowning financially long before they admitted it, because people under pressure become loud in strange ways. They slam cabinets harder. They whisper fight behind closed doors. They stop making eye contact with the people they secretly resent. And eventually, they start searching for someone to blame. If you're still listening, comment the word comeback below, because some of the strongest people are the ones who rebuilt their entire lives after getting discarded by their own family. The morning everything exploded started quietly. I was making blueberry pancakes for my granddaughter Lily when Vanessa walked into the kitchen wearing silk workout clothes she definitely couldn't afford. Her face already looked irritated. "Daniel wants to talk before he leaves for work," she said coldly. I glanced toward the hallway where my son stood with his arms folded tight across his chest. He wouldn't look directly at me. That was the first sign something bad was coming. "Mom," he said finally, "this arrangement isn't working anymore." And just like that, after everything I'd survived in life, I realized the people I loved most were preparing to erase me from theirs. Wish I could tell you my son cried when he threw me out. I wish I could say there was guilt in his eyes or hesitation in his voice. But the truth, Daniel looked relieved. Like removing me from his life was one less bill to worry about. One less responsibility dragging down the fake perfect image he and Vanessa worked so hard to maintain. "You'll figure something out," he muttered while carrying my last storage bin toward the hallway like he was late for an appointment. I stood there gripping the strap of my purse so tightly my fingers hurt. "Figure something out," I repeated quietly. "Daniel, I have nowhere to go." Vanessa leaned against the kitchen counter sipping one of those overpriced iced coffees she bought every morning. "Evelyn, you're a grown woman," she said with a shrug. "We can't put our lives on hold forever. Our lives." The words echoed in my head because apparently I was no longer included in that sentence. After everything I'd sacrificed to raise him, after every double shift, after every unpaid bill I hid from him so he could still go on school field trips and feel normal, now I was being spoken to like some stranger who overstayed her welcome. Little Lily came running down the hallway holding the birthday card I'd helped her make for school. "Grandma, are you leaving?" she asked innocently. Daniel answered before I could. "Grandma's moving somewhere else for a while, bug." "Why?" The silence that followed was brutal because children ask questions adults are too cowardly to answer. Finally, Vanessa forced a smile. "Because Grandma needs her own space." Lies always sound polished when selfish people tell them. I bent down and kissed Lily's forehead, trying not to cry in front of her. "I love you more than every star in the sky," I whispered. She wrapped her little arms around my neck so tightly it almost broke me. Then Daniel pulled her away because apparently even goodbye hugs had become inconvenient. By the time the sun started setting, my entire life had been reduced to 6 cardboard boxes, 2 duffel bags, and a plastic storage container filled with old photo albums. I remember standing outside their apartment building while passing cars splashed rainwater against the curb. My son avoided eye contact the entire time. "I'll call you when things calm down," he said automatically. That's when something inside me finally cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly and permanently. Because we both knew he was lying. People don't throw you away and suddenly become better later. They just become more comfortable with what they did. I spent my first night at the Harbor View Motel beside Interstate 11. The vacancy sign buzzed all night outside my window, and the room smelled like bleach, cigarettes, and old loneliness. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress eating crackers from a vending machine while staring at my bank balance on my phone. $913.42. That was all I had left after burying my husband and helping my son stay afloat. And for the first time in my entire life, nobody was coming to save me. If you've ever had to restart your life from absolute rock bottom, hit like on this video because people who have never struggled will never understand how terrifying silence feels when you suddenly have nowhere left to go. That first week nearly destroyed me. I cried in grocery store parking lots. I cried in the motel shower. I cried every morning waking up confused before reality punched me in the chest all over again. But eventually something strange started happening. After enough pain, your survival instincts wake up, and mine had been sleeping for years. By the second week, I stopped asking why this happened and started asking something more dangerous. What if losing everything was the first honest thing that had happened to me in years? The answer to that question would change my entire life. The thing about losing everything is that eventually fear burns itself out. After enough sleepless nights, enough humiliation, enough vending machine dinners eaten alone in a motel room, your brain stops panicking and starts adapting. And once that happened, I became dangerous. Every morning at 6 a.m., I started walking 3 blocks to the public library because it was the only place warm enough to sit for hours without spending money. I searched job listings, watched free business videos, and taught myself things nobody had bothered teaching me when I was younger. Most companies didn't want to hire a 61-year-old widow with tired eyes and outdated office experience. I could see it on their faces before interviews even started. They smiled politely. They thanked me for coming. And then they chose someone younger with shinier teeth and less life behind their eyes. By week 3, I had exactly $418 left. That number haunted me. I memorized it the same way people memorize emergency phone numbers, because survival suddenly becomes mathematical when your bank account starts collapsing. One rainy afternoon, while walking back from another failed interview, I noticed a small flower shop near the edge of downtown. A handwritten sign outside read, "Help wanted, part-time, inside smelled like soil and fresh eucalyptus." The owner, a sharp-faced woman named Lorraine Bennett, barely glanced up from her paperwork when I asked about the position. "Experience?" she asked. "Bookkeeping, inventory, customer service," I replied. "Plants?" I kept my husband's garden alive for 30 years. That finally made her look up. She studied me for a long moment before sighing. Minimum wage. 20 hours a week. Most people quit after 2 days because the work is physical. When do I start? I walked out of that flower shop with my first job in almost 18 years and cried so hard in the motel parking lot I had to sit inside my car for 20 minutes before driving away. It wasn't about the paycheck. It was about proof. I wasn't dead yet. The shop itself was chaos. Lorraine was talented but overwhelmed. Half the inventory wilted before getting sold. The storage system made no sense, and every Friday she threw away hundreds of dollars in damaged plants because customers only wanted perfect ones. At first, I kept quiet because people don't like advice from broke older women. But eventually, I couldn't help myself. "These roots aren't dead," I told her one afternoon while holding a half-wilted orchid. "It just needs to be repotted properly." Lorraine laughed. "That thing's garbage." "No," I said calmly. It's neglected. There's a difference. I took the orchid back to the motel room that night along with 2 other discarded plants she let me keep for free. The motel manager gave me a weird look carrying flowers into room 214 like I was starting a greenhouse beside the ice machine. But I didn't care. Because the moment I placed those dying plants near the window, something inside me shifted. I understood them, not in some magical nonsense way. I understood what it felt like to be abandoned before your value disappeared. What it felt like to look ruined while still having life left inside you. Every night after work, I researched soil conditions, root recovery, and rehabilitation techniques using library computers. Then I returned to my motel room and experimented for hours while old television reruns played quietly in the background. 2 weeks later, the orchid bloomed again. Lorraine stared at it like I'd performed witchcraft. "How the hell did you do that?" she asked. I smiled for the first time in months. Be surprised what survives when somebody finally gives it proper care. If you're still watching, comment, "Still growing" below because some people bloom their hardest after everybody else gives up on them. That orchid changed everything. Within 2 months, Lorraine stopped throwing damaged plants away completely. She gave them to me instead. I filled every corner of my motel room with struggling plants people thought were worthless. And slowly, unbelievably, they came back to life. So did I 3 months after my son threw me away. My motel room looked less like temporary housing and more like a secret jungle. There were recovering orchids beside the television. Snake plants lined the bathroom sink. Small ceramic pots covered the windowsill beside the buzzing air conditioner. And somehow, surrounded by things everyone else considered damaged, I finally stopped feeling broken myself. Lorraine started saving every unsold plant for me. Customers rejected flowers for ridiculous reasons. A bent stem, a discolored leaf, a cracked pot. Meanwhile, I saw opportunity sitting in trash bags behind the shop every single week. People only want perfect things, Lorraine complained one evening while closing the register. That's because most people are terrified of fixing anything, I replied. She laughed harder at that than I expected. By December, I'd restored over 90 plants successfully. The problem was I had nowhere to put them. My motel manager finally knocked on my door after a guest complained about the weird plant lady down the hallway. "Mrs. Carter," he sighed awkwardly. "You can't run a greenhouse business out of room 214. The fact he called it a business instead of a hobby planted an idea in my head that refused to leave. I spent that entire night awake with a notebook calculating numbers over stale vending machine coffee. If Lorraine sold healthy orchids for $40 and I restored damaged ones for less than $5 in supplies. Then why was I barely surviving instead of actually building something? The next morning, I made the scariest decision of my life. I used almost every dollar I had left to rent a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat on Mercer Street. The place smelled like detergent and old pipes. The kitchen was barely large enough to turn around in, and the radiator screamed like a dying animal every time the heat kicked on. But when I carried my plants inside that apartment, it felt like stepping into freedom for the first time in years. No son, no daughter-in-law, no tension, no walking on eggshells, just silence and possibility. I bought cheap metal shelves from a thrift store and turned the entire apartment into a restoration space. My dining table disappeared under fertilizer bags and gardening tools. I watched hundreds of hours of free videos online about soil chemistry, commercial nurseries, and plant recovery techniques. Then I started experimenting. I learned certain root systems responded better to cinnamon water. I discovered weak LED grow lights from hardware stores worked almost as well as professional setups if you position them correctly. I figured out most businesses destroyed inventory simply because nobody had patience anymore. And patience was something life had forced me to master. By spring, Lorraine wasn't the only shop calling me anymore. Word spread fast through the local gardening community. "Call Evelyn," people started saying. "That woman can bring anything back." Small nurseries began offering me damaged inventory instead of throwing it away. At first, I only restored flowers, then tropical plants, then expensive decorative trees restaurants used in hotel lobbies. Suddenly, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was making money, real money, more money than I'd seen in years. One Saturday afternoon, I sold 23 restored plants at a local outdoor market and made $1,870 cash. I sat in my car afterward staring at the envelope in my lap completely stunned, because for the first time since Walter died, I could finally breathe again. But success changes people around you. Funny thing about struggling in silence is nobody notices you until you stop struggling. That's when they suddenly remember your phone number. That's when they become curious. That's when people who ignored your pain start paying attention to your progress. And 6 months after throwing me away, my son finally called. If you're still listening, hit subscribe because the next part of this story is where the people who abandoned me realized the woman they discarded was becoming something they could no longer control. My phone rang at 8:42 p.m. I almost ignored it until I saw Daniel's name flash across the screen. For a second, I just stared at it. My own son hadn't checked whether I was alive in half a year. And now suddenly he was calling. I answered anyway. "Mom," his voice sounded nervous. "Hey," I leaned back in my chair slowly. "That's interesting," I said calmly. "You finally remembered I exist." Silence, then a forced laugh. "Come on, don't do that." But I noticed something immediately. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He wanted something. I could feel it already. And deep down, for the very first time, I realized I no longer needed his approval badly enough to ignore the truth. "Mom, I was thinking maybe we should meet for lunch sometime," Daniel said carefully, like we were distant coworkers instead of family. "Really?" I asked. "Because 6 months ago you couldn't wait to get me out of your apartment." He exhaled heavily. "I know things ended badly. That's a gentle way to describe making your widowed mother homeless." Another silence. Then finally the truth started leaking through. "Things have been stressful lately," he admitted. There it was. People rarely return because they suddenly grow a conscience. They return because life finally humbles them. I leaned back in my chair beside shelves packed with thriving orchids and listened quietly while he explained how complicated everything had become. His marketing job had cut commissions. Vanessa was spending money faster than they could earn it. The mortgage was behind again. Credit card debt was temporary. Every sentence sounded like someone trying to polish a sinking ship with expensive vocabulary. And the strangest part, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty listening to his problems. I felt detached, almost peaceful, because while Daniel's life was quietly collapsing, mine was finally beginning. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly. He hesitated. "That's it. What exactly were you hoping for?" Another long pause, then he finally asked the question he'd been building toward since the call began. "I heard from Lorraine that you've been doing well with the plant business." I almost smiled. There it was. "The real reason. I'm surviving," I answered carefully. "That's amazing, Mom, really." His voice brightened suddenly. "Maybe you could come by this weekend. Vanessa and I would love to reconnect." Reconnect. Interesting word coming from people who erased me from their lives like an unpaid subscription. But curiosity got the better of me. So Saturday afternoon, I drove across town in my 15-year-old Honda carrying a small lavender plant for Lily. The same apartment building looked even more worn down than I remembered. Paint peeling, rust stains beneath balconies, trash overflowing beside the dumpsters where my belongings once sat abandoned. Funny how differently places look once you stop begging to belong there. Lily opened the door before I even knocked. "Grandma." She threw her arms around me instantly, and for one painful second I realized how much time had been stolen from us. She was taller now, missing front teeth gone, her voice older. Children grow fast while adults waste time pretending pride matters more than love. "Look how beautiful you are," I whispered. She grinned proudly. "I'm on the honor roll now." "Of course you are." Then Vanessa appeared from the kitchen wearing a smile so fake it practically shimmered. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "you look good." Translation, you don't look poor anymore. I stepped inside slowly and immediately noticed the tension in the apartment. Unopened bills covered the counter. The television stand was missing, probably sold. And Daniel looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, stress leaking out of every movement. We sat awkwardly around the dining table while Vanessa served frozen lasagna on plates I recognized because I bought them 3 Christmases ago. "So," Daniel started carefully, "Lorraine says your business is expanding." "I wouldn't call it a business yet," I replied. "More like a restoration service." Vanessa leaned forward instantly. "But profitable." There it was again, that hunger. People can smell financial stability when they're drowning. I took a slow sip of water before answering. "Comfortable enough." Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa before clearing his throat. "Actually, there's something we wanted to ask you." Of course there was. Lily and her younger brother Mason kept chatting innocently while their parents prepared to use me again, and somehow that made it sadder. "We've been thinking maybe there's an opportunity here," Vanessa said smoothly. "You clearly have talent. Daniel has marketing experience. Together we could really scale this thing." I nearly laughed out loud. The same woman who treated me like dead weight now wanted partnership because she smelled money. "You want in?" I asked calmly. "We're family," Daniel said quickly. "Families help each other build success." Families, always that word when they needed something, never when I needed somewhere to sleep. If you're still watching, comment "Watch them switch up" below because nothing changes people faster than seeing someone they underestimated start succeeding. I looked around that apartment slowly. The peeling cabinets, the overdue notices partially hidden beneath magazines, the panic behind Vanessa's eyes. And suddenly I understood something important. They didn't miss me. They missed access to me. Big difference. I'll think about it, I said finally. And the hope that flashed across their faces told me everything I needed to know. I didn't call Daniel back for 9 days. Not because I was busy. Because for the first time in my life, I wanted him to understand what uncertainty felt like. I wanted him checking his phone, wondering whether I would help him the same way I once sat alone wondering if my own son cared whether I survived. And honestly, the silence suited me. During those 9 days, my little restoration business exploded. 2 luxury hotels hired me to revive dying decorative plants instead of replacing them every season. A restaurant owner paid me $4,000 to redesign his entire outdoor garden after seeing photos of my work online. And Lorraine finally stopped calling me help. Now she called me competition. You know you're bigger than my shop already, right? She laughed one afternoon while watching me load inventory into my car. I smiled but said nothing because secretly I'd already started thinking much bigger. I rented a small warehouse near the riverfront by the end of summer. It had cracked concrete floors, terrible lighting, and smelled like dust and machine oil. But when I unlocked those doors for the first time, I felt the same thing I imagine people feel standing inside a church after surviving a storm. Hope, real hope, not survival, not temporary relief, a future. I hired my first employee 3 weeks later. His name was Marcus, 24 years old, quiet, smart, homeless for almost a year after aging out of foster care. Nobody gives people a second chance anymore, he told me during his interview. I looked around at the thousands of struggling plants filling the warehouse shelves and smiled softly. That's funny, I said, because second chances are literally my business. Marcus worked harder than anyone I'd ever met. He learned restoration techniques fast, stayed late without complaining, and treated every damaged plant like it mattered. And watching someone rebuild their life beside me healed something inside my chest I didn't even realize was still broken. By October, we were processing inventory from 6 nurseries across the state. My social media page unexpectedly took off after a customer posted before and after videos of restored plants online. Suddenly, people everywhere became obsessed with transformation stories. The plant whisperer, one blogger called me. I hated the nickname, but I loved the attention because attention brings customers. And customers bring money, real money, the kind that changes your posture when you walk into a room, the kind that stops landlords from talking down to you, the kind that makes people who ignored you suddenly remember your birthday. Then one Friday afternoon, while reviewing invoices inside my warehouse office, Marcus knocked lightly on the door. "There's a man outside asking for you," he said. "Looks nervous." I glanced through the glass window and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Daniel. He stood near the loading dock, shifting awkwardly beside his expensive SUV that I knew for a fact he could no longer afford. Even from a distance, he looked worn down, stressed, thinner than before. Life was finally collecting payment for years of arrogance. "Send him in," I said calmly. My son walked into my warehouse, staring around in disbelief at the rows of thriving plants, stacked inventory, forklifts, employees moving through aisles wearing shirts with my company logo printed across the back, "Revive and Restore Botanical Recovery." He looked at me differently now, not like a burden, not like dead weight, like someone dangerous. Mom, his voice trailed off. You built all this. Funny what happens when people stop underestimating you. He gave a weak smile before sitting across from my desk. Vanessa doesn't know I'm here. Of course she didn't. I remembered the secret letter from the original version of my life and suddenly understood something important about my son. Cowards often become honest only in private. He rubbed both hands over his face, exhausted. We're in trouble, he admitted quietly. Real trouble. I stayed silent and let him continue because desperate people eventually reveal everything if you give them enough silence to fill. The bank's starting foreclosure proceedings, he whispered. Credit cards are maxed out. Vanessa keeps saying things will turn around, but his voice cracked slightly. I don't think we're gonna make it. Part of me wanted to comfort him, the mother part. That instinct never fully dies no matter how badly your children hurt you. But another part of me remembered standing alone beside a motel vending machine counting quarters for dinner while he ignored my existence. So instead I simply asked, "What exactly do you want from me, Daniel?" He stared at the floor for several seconds before finally answering. I need help. There it was, raw, simple, honest. And somehow hearing the words out loud felt less satisfying than I imagined. If you're still listening, subscribe right now because the next decision I made changed not only my son's life, but the balance of power between us forever. Daniel looked around my office again at the awards hanging on the wall, the framed business licenses, the shipment schedules covering my desk. I know I don't deserve anything after what happened, he said quietly, but I'm asking anyway. I folded my hands together slowly. And Vanessa, he laughed bitterly. Vanessa still thinks this is temporary. Meaning she still believes someone's gonna rescue us before reality hits. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table toward him. He frowned. What's this? An offer. He opened the folder slowly. His eyes widened immediately. You want to buy our apartment building? No, I corrected calmly. I already did. The color drained from his face. What? I leaned back in my chair, watching realization crash into him piece by piece. 3 weeks ago, the property owner defaulted on several loans. I bought the building through one of my investment companies. Daniel stared at me speechless. Which means, I continued softly, your family now pays rent to the same woman you once threw out onto the street. Daniel looked like someone had punched all the air out of his lungs. You own the building, he repeated quietly. I nodded once. Through a holding company. For several seconds, he just stared at the paperwork in front of him, trying to process how completely life had flipped against him. The same mother he once treated like disposable baggage now controlled the roof over his family's head. And the craziest part, I hadn't even bought the building for revenge. Not originally. I bought it because the numbers made sense. The property owner was desperate. The units were undervalued. The location sat directly beside a redevelopment zone investors were quietly pouring money into. But the moment I recognized Daniel's address on the tenant list, well, let's just say karma has excellent timing. Mom, his voice cracked. Please tell me you're not gonna evict us. There it was again, that fear. The exact same fear I felt standing outside in the rain with nowhere to go. And suddenly I understood something painful about power. People only call cruelty complicated until they experience helplessness themselves. I folded my hands carefully on the desk. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. Daniel shut his eyes hard for a second. The kids can't go through that. The kids. He finally mentioned the only innocent people involved. Lily cried for weeks after you disappeared, he admitted quietly. Mason barely remembers living with you now. That hurt more than I expected. Some losses don't scream, they ache slowly in silence. I stood up and walked toward the warehouse windows overlooking rows of restored plants glowing beneath warm industrial lights. Do you know what the strange thing is? I asked softly. I used to fantasize about this moment. Daniel stayed silent behind me. Back when I was eating crackers alone in that motel room, I imagined becoming successful enough to make you feel the same humiliation you made me feel. I turned toward him slowly. But now that it's actually happening, mostly I just feel tired. He looked genuinely ashamed for the first time in years. I was weak, he whispered. Vanessa kept saying we needed boundaries and stability, and you chose the easier person to disappoint. His eyes dropped immediately because we both knew it was true. Children rarely stop loving selfish parents. They just become adults who redirect that fear toward someone safer. I walked back to the desk and sat down again. Tell me the truth, I said calmly. How bad is it really? Daniel laughed once bitterly. Bad enough Vanessa started hiding shopping bags in the trunk so I wouldn't see how much she was spending. That bad. Worse. Then finally the full story came out. Job loss, gambling apps, credit card debt, pretending success online while drowning privately. Every stupid financial decision people make when they care more about appearances than reality. And underneath all of it, fear. Pure fear. Because fragile people often build fake luxury around themselves, hoping nobody notices how unstable they actually are. If you're still watching, comment, success is quiet. Below because the people showing off the hardest are usually hiding the biggest disasters behind closed doors. When Daniel finally finished talking, the warehouse fell silent except for forklifts humming somewhere in the distance. So what happens now? He asked. I studied him carefully, the exhausted posture, the panic behind his eyes, the regret arriving years too late. Then I slid another folder across the desk. What's this? He asked nervously. Employment paperwork. He blinked. You're offering me a job. Temporary operations assistant. Entry level. His expression shifted between relief and humiliation. Mom, before you get emotional, understand something clearly, I interrupted. This isn't charity. He swallowed hard. Then why? Because Lily and Mason deserve stability. I leaned forward slightly. And because, unlike you, I don't throw family away when they become inconvenient. The shame on his face was immediate and brutal. Good, some lessons should hurt. There are conditions, I continued. You show up on time. You work like everybody else. You earn your paycheck. And Vanessa doesn't get access to company finances, company property, or special treatment. Daniel nodded quickly. "'Kay. Also," I added calmly, "you will tell your children the full truth about why I disappeared from their lives." That one hit him harder. He looked away instantly. Mom, no more lies. The room stayed quiet for several seconds before he finally whispered. Okay. For the first time since Walter died, I realized something important. I was no longer reacting to my life. I was controlling it. And control changes everything. But what I didn't know yet was that Vanessa was about to become far more dangerous now that she realized the woman she once discarded had become the most powerful person in the room. Vanessa lasted exactly 12 days before she lost control. At first, she pretended to support Daniel taking the warehouse job. She smiled through dinner. She called it a fresh start. She even sent me a text message filled with fake gratitude and too many heart emojis. But manipulative people can only wear masks for so long before resentment starts leaking through the cracks. By Daniel's second week working under me, the tension inside their apartment became impossible to hide. He left home before sunrise wearing steel-toe work boots instead of designer loafers. He spent afternoons unloading inventory beside employees 10 years younger than him. And every Friday, he received a modest paycheck signed by the same mother he once treated like an inconvenience. Humility looked strange on him at first, but strangely, it also looked healthier, less fake, less exhausted. Meanwhile, Vanessa was unraveling. She hated that Daniel answered to me. She hated that Lily and Mason suddenly wanted to visit Grandma Evelyn's warehouse every weekend. She hated that the children laughed more around me than they did at home. And most of all, she hated that I no longer needed her approval. The warehouse became something unexpected for our family, not just a business, a gathering place. Marcus taught Mason how irrigation systems worked. Lily helped organize restored orchids by color while telling me gossip about school and teachers. One Saturday afternoon, she looked up at me while repotting a piece lily and asked quietly, "Grandma, did Dad really make you leave?" Children always ask hard questions softly. I brushed dirt from my hands slowly. "Your dad made a bad decision during a difficult time. Mom says you're trying to turn us against them now." I almost laughed because that sounded exactly like Vanessa. "And what do you think?" I asked gently. Lily shrugged. "I think people don't usually spend every weekend helping someone they hate." Smart girl, very smart. The more time the children spent around me, the more cracks formed inside the version of reality Vanessa had spent years building. She told them I abandoned the family. But abandoned people usually don't save your science fair projects, memorize your favorite snacks, and sit through 2-hour soccer games just to cheer when you touch the ball once. Children notice consistency even when adults underestimate them. And Vanessa was starting to panic. One Tuesday evening, she stormed into my warehouse unannounced wearing sunglasses and expensive perfume like she was arriving for a television audition instead of an argument. "We need to talk," she snapped. The entire warehouse went quiet. Marcus looked at me carefully from across the loading area waiting for instructions. I nodded once. Take 10. Employees scattered instantly while Vanessa marched into my office, slamming the glass door behind her. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she hissed. I leaned back calmly. "Enjoying what?" "Making Daniel work for you. Acting superior, turning the kids against us." Interesting how accountability always feels like cruelty to selfish people. "Your children are forming their own opinions," I replied evenly. "That must be frustrating for you." Her jaw tightened. "You think money makes you powerful now." I almost smiled because poor people think money creates power. Rich people know real power comes from not needing anyone's permission anymore. "No," I said softly. "Being underestimated made me powerful." That landed harder than yelling ever could. Vanessa paced across the office furiously. "Daniel says you bought another property downtown." "I did." "Why?" Investment. Bull, she snapped. This is revenge. I considered that for a second before answering honestly. No, Vanessa, revenge would have been letting your family become homeless the same way you almost let me become homeless. Silence. She stared at me speechless because deep down she knew I was right. I could have destroyed them already. Instead, I gave Daniel work. Stability. A chance to recover. And somehow my mercy irritated her more than cruelty would have. Because people like Vanessa can survive conflict. What destroys them is watching someone they mistreated rise so high they can no longer control the narrative. If you're still listening, hit like right now because the next part of this story is where Vanessa makes a decision so reckless it changes every relationship in her life forever. She stopped pacing suddenly and folded her arms tight. You know what your problem is, Evelyn. Enlighten me. You want everyone to see you as the victim. I laughed softly. Sweetheart, victims don't own commercial real estate. Her face darkened instantly. This little success streak has gone to your head. No, I corrected calmly. Getting thrown away taught me exactly who people are when they think you have nothing left to offer. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other across the office desk like two women standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. Then Vanessa smiled, and that terrified me more than her anger. Fine, she said quietly. You win. Manipulative people never surrender peacefully. They regroup. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the office door before stopping one last time. Just remember something, Evelyn. People who climb too fast usually fall even harder. After she left, Marcus walked back into the office carefully. Everything okay? I looked out the warehouse windows toward the parking lot where Vanessa sped away in her SUV. No, I said honestly, but I think it's about to get very interesting. And 3 days later, I discovered exactly how dangerous, desperate people become when they realize they're losing control. 3 days after Vanessa stormed into my warehouse, someone broke into my downtown office at 2:13 in the morning, not to steal money, not to vandalize equipment. They went straight for the filing cabinets containing financial records, property documents, and investor contracts. The alarm system triggered instantly, but whoever did it knew exactly where to go. Security footage showed a hooded figure inside the building for less than 4 minutes. Fast, deliberate, personal. You think it was random? Marcus asked, while police dusted for fingerprints across my office desk. I stared at the shattered glass door and already knew the answer. No, random burglars steal laptops, desperate people target leverage. And Vanessa had looked far too calm walking out of my warehouse earlier that week like someone already planning her next move. The police found almost nothing, no clear prints. No stolen electronics, no forced access to employee areas. But one thing bothered me more than anything else. Whoever entered the building knew the exact drawer containing documents tied to my newest riverfront investment project. The project wasn't public yet. Only 5 people knew details about it: me, Marcus, my attorney, my accountant, and Daniel. My stomach tightened immediately because betrayal stops shocking you after enough years. It just becomes exhausting. By afternoon, I was sitting across from Daniel inside a small diner near the warehouse watching him unravel while I explained what happened. Mom, I swear to God I didn't tell Vanessa anything, he said instantly. His reaction looked genuine, panicked, but genuine. Then how did she know where to look? I asked quietly. He rubbed both hands through his hair hard. She's been going through my phone lately. Why? He laughed bitterly. Because she thinks everybody's hiding something now. That told me everything I needed to know. When trust disappears from a relationship, people start digging for weapons instead of answers. Did you show her any project documents? No. Then his face suddenly changed, realization hitting him in real time. Wait, he looked sick. My email. What about it? She knows my password. There it was, the beginning of the collapse. Some people destroy relationships slowly. Other people set their entire lives on fire trying to avoid losing control. You need to understand something carefully, I said calmly. If Vanessa crossed legal lines to hurt my business, this becomes much bigger than family drama. Daniel nodded immediately. I know. Do you? I asked softly. Because 6 years ago you watched that woman throw your mother away while you stood there silent. Now she's trying to destroy the only thing I built after surviving that betrayal. He looked down at the table, unable to answer. Good. Because guilt should feel heavy if it's real. If you're still watching, comment "Karma keeps receipts" below because the people who create chaos eventually forget one important thing. Successful people document everything. By the next morning, my attorney confirmed something worse. Someone had attempted to access investor accounts connected to the riverfront project using stolen credentials. They failed. But the attempt itself created a digital trail. And that trail led directly back to Vanessa's laptop. I sat inside my office holding the investigation report while a strange calm settled over me. Not rage, not panic, clarity. Because for the first time since my husband died, I finally understood the difference between surviving and becoming untouchable. Survival means reacting. Power means preparing. And I had prepared very carefully over the last 3 years. Every property under separate holding companies. Every account monitored. Every agreement documented. People underestimate older women because they mistake softness for stupidity. Big mistake. That evening, Daniel arrived at my penthouse looking physically ill. He stood in the doorway staring around the massive living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Blackthorn Harbor like he still couldn't fully process how much my life had changed. "Vanessa's gone," he said quietly. I set my wine glass down slowly. Gone where? Took the SUV. Took most of the savings we had left too. I almost laughed at the irony. The woman obsessed with appearances had finally abandoned ship the moment reality stopped looking luxurious. And the kids? I asked immediately. At my sister's house for the night. He sat heavily on the couch, burying his face in both hands. I don't know how everything got this bad. I studied him silently for several seconds before answering. It got bad the moment maintaining the illusion became more important than protecting the people who loved you. That hit him hard because deep down he knew it was true. All those years chasing status. All those years trying to look successful instead of becoming stable. And now the entire performance was collapsing publicly around him. He looked up finally, eyes red. "Do you hate me?" The question surprised me, not because he asked, because I realized I no longer knew the answer. I remembered the little boy who used to wait by the window for me after work. I remembered birthday cakes, baseball games, nightmares after thunderstorms. And then I remembered standing alone beside that motel vending machine wondering if my own son cared whether I lived or died. I think, I said slowly. Part of me stopped recognizing you for a while. Silence filled the penthouse. Then Daniel whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I stopped recognizing myself too. Outside the harbor, lights reflected across black water, while somewhere far below the city continued moving like normal, completely unaware that one family was quietly falling apart 27 floors above them. But the real shock came the next morning, because Vanessa didn't disappear alone. She took something else with her too, something valuable enough to threaten everything I had built. The thing Vanessa stole wasn't cash. It was worse. She took a portable hard drive containing early investor files, redevelopment blueprints, and confidential purchase agreements connected to my biggest riverfront project yet, a luxury botanical resort planned along the Blackthorn Harbor expansion zone. The project was worth millions. And in the wrong hands, those files could destroy negotiations overnight. I stood inside my penthouse kitchen at 6:14 a.m., staring at the empty security drawer while cold fury settled into my chest like concrete. Daniel looked physically sick beside me. "Mom, I didn't know she even had access to your office." "She didn't," I replied quietly. "She had access to you." That silence hurt him more than yelling ever could, because deep down he finally understood the truth. People rarely destroy their lives all at once. They destroy them slowly through small compromises they keep excusing until the damage becomes irreversible. By noon, my attorney had already filed emergency injunctions locking down investor activity. But the bigger problem wasn't legal. It was reputation. One leaked rumor in commercial real estate spreads faster than wildfire. And Vanessa knew exactly how vulnerable expansion projects become during negotiation phases. "Do you think she'll sell the files?" Marcus asked while helping me review damage reports. "No," I answered immediately. "Vanessa doesn't want money." He frowned. "Then what does she want?" I looked out across the harbor skyline through the office windows. "Control. And controlling people becomes impossible once they stop needing your approval. That's what terrified her most. Not my money, not the properties, not even the success. She hated that I survived without her permission." At 3:47 p.m., my phone finally rang, unknown number. I answered instantly. "You should have helped us when you had the chance," Vanessa said coldly. No greeting, no fear. Just anger sharpened by desperation. I leaned back slowly in my office chair. Stealing from me was a terrible decision. She laughed bitterly. "Please, you think because you bought a few buildings you're untouchable now." "No," I said calmly. "I think because I built my life from nothing, I know how to survive people exactly like you." Silence, then her voice lowered. "I want $2 million. There it was, blackmail, raw and ugly. You're out of your mind." "Maybe," she snapped. "But investors get nervous when confidential documents start appearing online." I almost smiled because desperate people always reveal themselves eventually. "You won't release anything," I said quietly. "Because if you do, federal investigators become involved. And unlike Daniel, I won't protect you from consequences." Another silence, but this one felt different, shakier. She expected panic. She expected the frightened widow from years ago. Not the woman who now employed attorneys capable of dismantling her life piece by piece. "You think you've won," she hissed. I already did, I replied softly. The night I realized I didn't need any of you anymore. And then I hung up. If you're still listening, subscribe right now because the next 48 hours became the most ruthless power shift of my entire life. By evening, my legal team traced Vanessa's movements. She checked into a luxury hotel downtown using a fake name paid for with stolen credit cards because apparently financial crimes become addictive once people stop fearing consequences. But what she didn't know, the hotel belonged to one of my investment groups. I didn't tell Daniel immediately. Instead, I watched him pace across my penthouse living room, drowning in panic. She's not thinking clearly, he kept repeating. No, I corrected calmly. She's finally showing you who she's always been. That sentence destroyed him more than anything else because somewhere deep down he'd spent years protecting a fantasy version of his marriage while ignoring reality standing directly in front of him. Then around midnight, Lily called me crying. Grandma? Her voice shook hard. Mom won't answer her phone, and Dad keeps yelling at people, and Mason thinks we're gonna lose our apartment. That did it, right there. Any lingering softness toward Vanessa disappeared completely, because adults can destroy themselves all they want. But dragging children through chaos for ego, unforgivable. I drove across the city immediately and picked the children up myself. Mason fell asleep in the backseat clutching his backpack while Lily sat quietly beside me staring out the window. Are Mom and Dad getting divorced? She whispered. Children always know before adults admit it. I tightened both hands on the steering wheel. I think your parents are trying to figure out who they really are right now. She nodded slowly like someone much older than 14. Dad cries when he thinks nobody sees him. That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. Because sometimes people don't collapse all at once. Sometimes they leak sadness slowly until there's nothing left holding them together. When we reached the penthouse, Daniel opened the door looking completely broken. The moment he saw the kids safe behind me, he nearly collapsed with relief. And standing there in that massive luxury apartment watching my son cry quietly while his children hugged him, I realized something strange. I no longer wanted revenge. Revenge is emotional. Control is practical. And what I wanted now was control over whether this family survived at all. But the next morning, everything changed. Because Vanessa finally made the one mistake desperate people always make. She underestimated how dangerous calm women can become once they stop begging to be loved. The mistake Vanessa made was thinking kindness meant weakness. She forgot something very important about women who survive rock bottom. We learn how to operate without panic. And calm people are dangerous. On Monday morning at exactly 9:00 a.m., Vanessa walked into the lobby of Blackthorn Financial Group carrying stolen files she believed could destroy my riverfront deal. What she didn't know was that my attorneys, 2 fraud investigators, and a federal financial crimes officer were already waiting upstairs. Because the moment she attempted blackmail across state investment channels, this stopped being family drama and became a felony. She realized something was wrong the second she stepped into the conference room. "What is this?" she snapped, looking around nervously. I sat calmly at the far end of the table wearing a cream silk blazer she probably couldn't afford even on her best day. "This," I said softly, "is the consequence stage of your decisions. The color drained from her face as investigators introduced themselves. One by one, they laid out everything: stolen credentials, fraudulent access attempts, hotel surveillance footage, phone records linking her to leaked investor threats, and finally, the transfer history showing she'd used Daniel's personal accounts without permission for years to hide debt and unauthorized credit lines. Even Daniel looked stunned sitting beside me. "Vanessa," he whispered. She immediately pointed at me. She set me up. One investigator actually laughed. "Ma'am, you committed wire fraud using devices registered in your own name." That was the moment her confidence shattered completely. People like Vanessa survive through intimidation. But the second real consequences arrive, they collapse fast. "I was desperate," she cried suddenly. "We were drowning." I leaned forward slowly. "And 6 years ago, when I was drowning," silence. "Did you care then?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not hatred, not satisfaction, just clarity, because some people only understand pain once it finally belongs to them. After 2 hours of negotiations, Vanessa accepted a deal. No prison time, full financial restitution, mandatory cooperation with investigators. Divorce proceedings would follow within weeks. She walked out of that conference room looking smaller somehow. Like all the arrogance holding her upright had finally collapsed under its own weight. Daniel sat frozen long after she left. "I didn't know," he kept whispering. "I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know." And for the first time in years, I believed him, because weak people often participate in destruction without fully understanding how far things have gone. That doesn't excuse them, but it does make them human. If you've stayed with me this far, subscribe and comment second chances below, because sometimes losing everything is the only thing painful enough to force people into becoming honest. Then came the moment nobody in Blackthorn Harbor saw coming. 3 months later, I officially opened Carter Botanical Resort and Residences, the single largest private redevelopment project on the riverfront. News stations covered the ribbon cutting. Local politicians showed up. Business magazines called me the comeback queen of Blackthorn. Funny title for a woman who once ate vending machine crackers alone beside a motel ice machine. But the real moment, the moment that healed something deep inside me, it happened after the cameras left. Lily and Mason stood beside me on the rooftop garden overlooking the harbor lights, while soft music drifted through the grand opening party below. "Grandma," Mason asked quietly, "did you ever hate Dad?" I looked across the skyline, thinking about everything life had taken from me, and everything it somehow gave back. "No," I answered honestly, "but I hated the version of him that forgot who he was." Down below, Daniel laughed softly while helping Marcus move flower arrangements across the ballroom floor. He looked different now, simpler, calmer. He rented a modest apartment nearby, worked full-time managing logistics for my company, and spent every spare second rebuilding trust with his children. No luxury cars, no fake image, no pretending. And somehow, stripped of all the performance, he finally looked like my son again. Later that night, after the guests left and the harbor went quiet, I stood alone on my penthouse balcony with a glass of wine, watching city lights shimmer across the water. 6 years earlier, I stood in cold rain beside a pile of cardboard boxes, wondering whether my life was already over. Now I owned half the skyline in front of me. But the money was never the real victory. The real victory was this: nobody could ever throw me away again. Not because I became rich, because I finally understood my worth before anyone else approved of it. And honestly, that lesson was worth more than every building I owned combined. And honestly, that lesson was worth more than every building I owned combined. If you made it all the way to the end of my story, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And remember this carefully: being abandoned does not make you worthless. Sometimes the people who walk away from you are the same people who accidentally force you to discover how powerful you were all along.